Hi, Premier. It's good to see you. Thank you very much for making the time
my
for
pleasure.
the conversation. I wanted to start off on the convention here. In particular, huge result for Pierre Poilievre. Every person I've interviewed involved in their campaign has said, the focus is very much on anticipating an election and what now. You've won an election. This party did not win the last election. What's your best advice to him about the what now question?
I can tell you, it's the advice that I gave him during the campaign when it was at a hard point. I said, you found a way to take the Conservative Party to a point where we could get within reach of government and haven't been able to do that for a long time. I know you're going to find a way on this one. And part of what happened in the last election is the Liberals had to massively pivot, steal a lot of Pierre's platform on carbon tax, on becoming an energy superpower, and a few other things. And I think that's why they were able to squeak in. But this strong mandate allows him to go back to Parliament and make sure that he pushes the government on the things they committed to in the next election, and also that offer that alternative if they don't.
Do you think it's harder to paint the picture of the alternative now that, as you point out, a lot of the policies that this version of the Liberal government is putting forward are much more reflective of, it would conventionally you'd characterize as conservative policies versus like what we had seen under the former Prime Minister? Is it more difficult than it might have been even a year ago to paint that contrast, do you think?
They're two different leaders for sure, but I think they own the Trudeau Liberal legacy because so many of those MPs were at the cabinet table or in the caucus voting for them. And it's by no means clear to me that the Prime Minister has won that war within his own party to be able to push this agenda forward. It's very clear that because he doesn't have a majority, the NDP and the Greens are not supportive of the agenda that has been put forward, and so there's a lot of pressure on him. That's why I think having a very strong voice from Pierre is going to make a real difference.
The Prime Minister and his support, his MPs often invoke the.
Will Danielle Smith call an early election in Alberta? Picture this, Danielle Smith, sitting in her office, hovering over a big red button labeled Early Election. Her hand trembles. She knows one wrong move could end it all, or cement her legacy for years to come. The question everyone in Alberta is whispering, will she push it? Quick favor, if you're finding this entertaining, smash that subscribe button. Over 92% of you haven't yet. It's free, takes 2 seconds, and honestly, it helps us keep bringing you the best Canadian political drama out there. Thanks if you did. Now, back to the chaos. So, let's get into it. Danielle Smith is riding high right now, and when you're at the top in politics, you start thinking dangerous thoughts. Like, hey, maybe I should go to the polls while everyone still likes me. It's the political equivalent of quitting your job right after getting Employee of the Month. Bold? Absolutely. Risky? You bet. Here's the thing about early elections. They're like ordering dessert before your main course arrives. Sure, it feels exciting and rebellious, but there's always a chance you'll regret it when the bill comes. Smith won the 2023 election, barely, against Rachel Notley and the NDP. It was closer than a hockey game going into overtime. Since then, she's been working overtime herself to solidify her position, rebuild trust with Albertans who weren't
MOU with you as evidence that he is different. He is serious about advancing that agenda. What do you make of that, and do you take that at face value?
I guess we have a big test coming. There's a couple of things I'd say. It's already made a difference, the MOU. By saying that Alberta will have a carve-out on the clean electricity regs, we now have 20 data centers that are moving towards final investment decision because they can now use natural gas without fear that someone's going to go to jail in 2035 if they don't meet 95% abatement reduction targets, because we're now stretching it out to 2050. That's been a huge win. Second was the emissions cap being eliminated. We now have Enbridge, South Bow, Trans Mountain, and others with us, with the West Coast Pipeline, talking about expanding production, whereas the conversation before was shutting in 2 million barrels. So it's already had an impact. That being said, the exercise before us right now is, can we trade with each other? Can the country work? Can we develop regulatory processes that will allow us to get these big major nation building projects built? And I guess the jury's still out on that. We have to see. I'm encouraged by the Major Projects Office. I know that the Conservatives supported C5 as well, but we have to see some of these projects move from consideration to approval to shovels in the ground. And that's what we'll see over the next year.
The one project I want to ask you about is, of course, the possibility, and we've spoken about this on multiple occasions, no surprise, the possibility of a pipeline to the West Coast. And in particular, I listened with great interest as the Prime Minister very specifically said this week in the House of Commons that the MOU will get a pipeline built to the West Coast. Like, that was the exact verbiage that he used that I had not heard him be as explicit about before. He's intimated such would be the case, but not as explicitly as that. Has he been explicit to you in providing assurances that that will happen? happen?
Well, I think he's told us, of course, to go through the process, but that was what the MOU was about. It was about us jointly committing to what we would need to do to get a pipeline built. I mean, look, when foreign dignitaries came to Canada under Justin Trudeau, he said there was no business case for
Quite sold on her, and frankly, looked more premier-like and less radio host who accidentally wandered into the legislature. But why would she even consider an early election? Well, let's talk numbers, because in politics, numbers are everything. Smith's United Conservative Party has been polling reasonably well lately. Not spectacular, not earth-shattering, but solid enough to make any politician think, maybe I should cash in these chips while they're worth something. The NDP, meanwhile, is in the middle of a leadership race after Notley stepped down. They're essentially trying to rebuild the plane while it's flying, which, spoiler alert, is not the ideal time to face an election. And that's where the strategy gets spicy. Smith knows that the NDP without a permanent leader is like the Oilers without Connor McDavid. Sure, they can still play, but they're not exactly at full strength. If she calls an election before the NDP crowns their new leader, she could catch them flat-footed, unprepared, and scrambling. It's the political equivalent of showing up to a fight when your opponent is still tying their shoes. Now, let's pivot to the flip side, because nothing in politics is ever simple. Calling an early election could backfire spectacularly. Albertans are practical people. They don't love being dragged to the polls unnecessarily, especially when they just voted. It feels wasteful, opportunistic, and frankly, a bit presumptuous. Imagine your friend inviting you to their birthday party, and then 3 months later, they throw another one and expect you to show up with gifts again. That's how voters might feel. Plus, there's the unpredictability factor. Elections are like opening Pandora's box while blindfolded. You think you know what's inside, but once it's open, anything can happen. Smith could call an election expecting a coronation and end up in a dogfight. Or worse, she could lose. And nothing ends a political career faster than losing an election you didn't need to call in the first place. Just ask any premier who's tried this move and failed. Let's also consider the issues at play. Alberta is dealing with healthcare strain, education funding debates, economic uncertainty, and the eternal question of how to balance oil and gas with renewable energy without making everyone angry. These aren't easy sells on the campaign